Hello and welcome to JamHammer. In this video, we're going to be looking at how to make the fleshy mutations on our Chaos Forces look gory and grotesque. We'll be using this Alpha Legion Helbrute throughout, as I thought it would make a great example for how we can create this effect, as there are so many different tubes, eruptions and growths sprouting all over this monstrous machine. But you can use the techniques we'll be going over today on any of your Chaos Forces, as well as any other 40k armies that need a splash of the macabre, or perhaps some shiny gemstones, as we'll see later in this video. I'll quickly run through how I painted this Helbrute first though, in case you're interested in replicating this scheme. I began with a black prime undercoat from a rattle can, allowed this to dry, then used this metallic teal paint from Deco Art for that iridescent armour panelling. I'll leave an affiliate link to this, as well as the Vallejo paint set and other tools that I used in this video in the description below for you to click on if you wanted to purchase any of these for yourself. As this particular paint isn't exclusively created for use on miniatures, it has a slightly lower pigment than we're used to, so it does require a couple of coats for full coverage. For the armour trim, I used the silver paint from the Vallejo paint set, and then I painted all the other metallic parts like the multi-melt barrels, chains and the fist with a gunmetal colour. Next up, I painted the flesh by blending bronze flesh tone with an off-white bone colour. I used these in a ratio of about 1:1, as you can see on my wet palette here. With this ratio it created this nice orangey warm colour that I think looks quite effective when offset against that cold metallic blue and silver of the armour. I applied this to all the flesh on the miniature, as well as the various tubes and sinew that connect it to the mechanic parts of the Helbrute. As I was applying such a light colour over a black undercoat, this did require a few coats again. I painted the parts of exposed rubber tubing that are peeking out through the flesh with a grey paint, and then applied a few thin coats of just the off-white bone colour to all of the horns, spikes and teeth that are dotted all over this mini. I allowed this to dry, then used these two washes from Army Painter, Dark Tone and Strong Tone. I used the Dark Tone on all of the armour and metallic parts, let this dry, then applied a very heavy coat of the Strong Tone all over that flesh to create a lot of depth in those recesses. After this had dried, I painted the jewels and eyes with white, then took a dark green paint, watered it way down on my palette like this, and then ran this over the top to try and create a glow effect, which I think, unfortunately with these larger pieces, ended up looking a bit chalky and washed out. Next, I used the teal in the centre of those arm panels and silver along the edges to re-establish a little of the shine that had been dulled out by that wash. Then I used the same 50-50 bronze flesh tone and bone white to highlight the skin by repainting the raised parts but keeping the darker shading in the recesses. Finally, I used just the bone white by itself again, nicely watered down, to paint the tips of the horns and teeth so they shift gradually from dark brown to cream. There's a more detailed video available on the channel for how to recreate this on your Heretic Astartes, which I'll leave a link to here if you want to see how to go through this scheme step by step. I was quite happy with the results, especially when viewing the mini from the front, as there's a great balance between metal and flesh, as well as between the warmer orange and colder blue. However, when viewed from the back, there's very little armour on the Helbrute, so it's just a massive expanse of featureless flesh. It looks a bit like one of those hairless Sphinx cats. To try and add a bit more variety to the model then, and to introduce a few more colours, I wanted to include some more detailing on this peachy canvas, so decided to lean into the grim chaos lore and make this thing look more like a dreadnought that's been twisted and corrupted by the dark powers. I also had this large bottle of painting medium lying around. I accidentally bought this when I was making a dip wash for some orc terrain, as it's used to improve the consistency of paints. However, I didn't realise that this was glossy, and made everything it was mixed with end up with a shiny, wet finish. So I thought this could be useful for making some slick looking mutations, as well as some sticky looking viscera. Perfect for our Helbrute here. I took a drop or two of this royal purple from Vallejo and steadily mixed it with about 5 drops of the medium like this. We can see that the colour has lightened and that it has this quite translucent appearance, but the texture is much more akin to paint straight from the bottle, with none of the breaking apart of pigments we can risk when we just water down a paint to a gloss. I'm going to paint this mixture all over these tubes here to make them look as though they're pulsating with dark energies. Applying this quite thickly so we get these globs of colour, but we still get that flesh tone peeking through underneath. I don't want this on those rubber tubes though, so I'm going to use a clean, slightly damp brush to move the purple away from these areas. I'm now going to repeat this on all the other tubes that are linking up the weaponry on this mini, as well as the scarred flesh surrounding the multi-melter. I left this to dry for a few minutes and we get this result. Although this is dry to the touch, it still looks wet and shiny on the model. If you wanted to just improve the consistency and flow of your paints though, and not have this gloss effect, you could instead use a matte medium and it will dry to a regular finish. For example, you could take the purple we've used here, mix it with a matte medium, and then apply it over the skin of your unit and it will dry without a gloss and will look like bruised flesh instead. Also, if you decide afterwards that you don't like the glossy appearance, then you can always go over the area with a matte varnish and it will return it to normal. I also wanted to test this gloss effect and the improved consistency on those gemstones and eyes. The regular watered down green gloss worked great on my smaller infantry units, but on these larger parts on the Helbrute, they end up looking too cracked and patchy. So I've done the same thing as before here, a blob of our Vallejo dark green mixed bit by bit with a few drops of the medium until we get the diluted syrupy mix. And now going to apply a dab of this to these eyes, as well as the gemstones on the chest and the back of the fists, and then allow these to dry again. These have dried to the touch, and this has a much nicer appearance. Still have that white coming through to suggest that these areas are glowing, but now with a more cohesive green pigment as well as a visible sheen as well. Finally, we're going to make our very own blood for the blood god. This technical paint from Games Workshop dries with a glossy finish to make it look as though there's fresh shiny blood on your minis. Grimdark as hell. Take some red paint, put a drop of it on your palette, then get your medium, add about 5 drops nearby, then slowly drag the paint into it and mix. And now we have this pale translucent red paint. Back to the mini, I'm going to apply this to a few areas to make it look like there's blood spattered about, like on this moor here where these bones are bursting out. Getting some of this colour in and around the mouth on the fist too. Also, as this is quite an old model, I couldn't check on this, but I think I glued it together incorrectly here, as these two bits of tube don't connect and are instead wedged next to each other. I want to lean into this though and paint some of this red in there, and on the base as well, to make it look like this monstrosity has been damaged and it's bleeding. We don't want to go too overboard with this though, as you can see it's quite lurid and doesn't really blend in very well yet. But we'll fix that now. Take a black paint and drop a little of this on the other side of the red on your palette. Take your brush and start blending this the other way, up into our medium, so that it mixes progressively with the red and we get this nice gradient moving from red to light brown to dark brown to black. We can use this to connote the age of our blood, with the oldest and driest at the bottom and the freshest at the top with that bright red. This translates to our model too, where we can suggest a combination of old, unhealed, and new damage caused by demonic corruption as well as combat. take some of this and start working it around areas that we want to look like scabrous old blood that's dried. I'm going to put some around the base of the barrels of the multi-melter here, for example, so that the flesh looks wounded. I'm also going to apply a little of this browner paint in and around the parts where the machinery of the Helbrute meets the skin, so it has the appearance of an old but still weeping tear. I'll put a bit of the lighter hue in and around the maw here as well, and on the very bright red blood that's on the bones and teeth, so that it's dulled but seems as though it's still open and bleeding. Finally, going to stipple a bit of the darkest viscera on the torn flesh around the exhaust vents, as well as the spines and horns poking through here to make them look like old wounds that still have a sticky, scabby appearance. And there we go, a truly monstrous visage of armour fused with flesh. We've elevated the mutations and corruption on our mini and created a truly gross spectacle to bring terror and destruction to the foes of the Chaos Gods. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider liking it, subscribing to the channel, and clicking the bell to be notified of new videos being released. You don't have to use medium for shiny chaos growths, eyes, and blood though. You could also use it for creating, say, a glow effect on your Necron's Gauss weaponry. Or you could use it as an oozing ichor dripping from the maws and bioengineered weaponry of your Tyranids. There'll be more Warhammer 40k videos being released in the future, so please do keep an eye out for new content coming soon to JamHammer. In the meantime, there are plenty of other videos available on the channel, including a few that are on screen now for you to click on. Thanks again for watching.